This lecture is on the tissue level of organization. What are tissues? Tissues are groups of cells that are similar in structure and function. Two or more tissue layers are organized into organs. Tissues support and connect all of the organs and organ systems within the organism. There are four types of tissues. Epithelial tissues form boundaries, linings, and glands. Connective tissue supports and binds the organs. Muscle tissue moves organs, and nervous tissue conducts impulses. Tissues are placed into groups based on their embryonic development and their specific structure and function. Tissue development begins in the embryonic blastula. Stem cells are undifferentiated cells that have the capacity to differentiate into different tissue types. Some stem cells persist into adulthood. Three embryonic tissue layers develop during differentiation: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. The ectoderm will form the epidermal layer of the skin. The endoderm will form the lining of the gut, liver, and the lungs. Mesoderm will form muscle, bone, kidneys, blood, gonads, and connective tissues. The ectoderm will also form the nervous system. This illustration shows the four different tissue types in the stomach. The lining is epithelial tissue. The wall of the stomach is made up of connective tissue and muscle tissue. Nervous tissue is found within all layers. Let's talk about epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue forms boundaries, linings, and glands. Characteristics of epithelial tissue includes they're highly cellular, consisting of tightly connected cells. Epithelial tissue has polarity, having an apical and basal surface for each cell. The apical surface is in contact with the environment. The basal surface attaches to the basement membrane made of collagen fibers. Avascularity means that epithelial tissues lack blood vessels. Innervated means that nerve endings are plentiful. And a high rate of regeneration means cells must replace themselves due to extensive environmental damage. This illustration shows the apical and basal surface of tightly packed epithelial cells. The basal surface lies on the basement membrane made of collagen fibers. Nerves are going to innervate the epithelium, and the epithelial cells will undergo mitosis, shown here on the right, due to excessive environmental pressures. Epithelial tissues have a variety of functions. They include physical protection against abrasion, chemicals, temperature extremes, water loss, and pathogens, the absorption of nutrients into the blood, the filtration of substances from the blood into tissue fluid. This illustration shows absorption of nutrients into the blood. These cells are in the intestinal linings, and the nutrients are coming from the food you eat. They pass through the cells of the intestines into the bloodstream. Filtration occurs when there is a higher pressure and a lower pressure gradient. In this case, the capillary has the higher pressure gradient, and substances are pushed into the surrounding tissue fluid. Other functions of epithelial tissues include secretion of materials made in the cell into tissue fluid, the excretion of waste products out of the cell, and sensory reception. There is a network of nerve endings to detect changes in the environment. This illustration shows the secretion of materials made in the cell into tissue fluid. The Golgi apparatus is packaging the secretions into vesicles, and the vesicles then join to the plasma membrane, where the contents are secreted by exocytosis. Excretion is waste products. So this illustration shows a cell ingesting a food particle and making a lysosome, that's what that word is, and digesting that food particle. Once the necessary nutrients have been absorbed, the waste products will be excreted out of the cell. Excretion is waste. Epithelial tissues are named according to the following characteristics: the number of layers present and the shape of the cells within the layers. For the number of layers present, a simple epithelium has one layer of cells. A stratified epithelium has two or more layers of cells. Pseudostratified epithelium appears to be layered, but all cells connect to the basement membrane. In transitional epithelium, it is stratified, but the cells are different shapes and sizes. As far as the shape of the cells within the layers, if they are flattened cells, they are called squamous. Columnar cells are taller than they are wide, and cuboidal cells are equal height and width. This illustration shows a simple epithelium with one layer of cells. The stratified epithelium has two or more layers of cells. The shapes are squamous if flat, cuboidal if same height and width, columnar if taller than wide. Epithelial tissues are also categorized based on where they are found in the body and their functions. Covering and lining epithelia form external surfaces of the body and the internal linings of organs and body cavities. Glandular epithelia secrete substances. There are two types of glands. Endocrine glands secrete hormones into the blood, and exocrine glands secrete products into ducts. Here are examples of covering and lining epithelia. In Figure A, we see simple squamous epithelium, one layer of flattened cells. Figure B shows simple cuboidal epithelium, one layer of cube-shaped cells. Figure C shows simple columnar epithelium, one layer of columnar-shaped cells. Figure D shows pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. This appears to be stratified, but all the cells attach to the basement membrane. The cilia are found on the apical surface. In stratified squamous epithelium shown in Figure C, we have two or more layers of flattened cells. The flat-shaped cells occur at the apical surface of this tissue. Examples of specialized covering and lining epithelia include the epidermis, the mesothelium, and the endothelium. The epidermis is comprised of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. It's found in the skin. Mesothelium is comprised of simple squamous epithelium lining the serous membranes. Endothelium is comprised of simple squamous epithelium lining the heart and blood vessels. Let's look at some more detailed images of these epithelial tissues. In simple squamous epithelium, we have one layer of flattened cells. The function is to allow the passage of materials by diffusion and filtration. Locations include kidney glomeruli and the air sacs of the lungs. In the lining of the heart and blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, it's called endothelium, and lining the serosa, it's called mesothelium. Simple cuboidal epithelium consists of one layer of cube-shaped cells. The function is secretion and absorption, and they are found in the kidney tubules, in small glands, and in the ovary. Simple columnar epithelium is one layer of columnar-shaped cells, and the function is absorption and the secretion of mucus, enzymes, and other substances. If it is ciliated, it will propel mucus. Non-ciliated types are going to be found in most of the digestive tract, as well as the gallbladder and in some glands. If it is ciliated, it will be found in the small bronchi of the lungs, the uterine tubes, and some regions of the uterus. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium is one layer of cells that appear to be stratified. The function of this tissue is secretion, particularly of mucus, propulsion of mucus by the ciliary action. Cilia are found on the apical surface, and they will propel the mucus over the surface and out of the respiratory system. This is primarily where we will find the ciliated variety, is in the trachea and most of the upper respiratory tract. Stratified squamous epithelium is a thick membrane composed of several cell layers. The basal cells are cuboidal and they are very metabolically active. The surface cells are flattened or squamous. If this is a keratinized tissue, the surface cells will be full of keratin and dead. The function of this tissue is to protect the underlying tissues in areas subject to abrasion. We will find the non-keratinized type in the moist linings of the esophagus, mouth, and vagina. The keratinized variety will form the epidermis of the skin, which is a dry membrane. Transitional epithelium resembles both stratified squamous and stratified cuboidal. The basal cells are cuboidal or columnar, and the surface cells will be dome-shaped or squamous-like, depending on the degree of organ stretch. Thus, the function is the stretching of the organs, particularly in the bladder where it is found. It is also found in the ureters, which is going to go from the kidneys to the bladder. When the urinary tract is full of urine, this tissue allows for the organs to stretch to accommodate the urine volume. As far as glands go, there are endocrine and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands are ductless, meaning that there are no ducts that carry the secretions onto the surface of the organ. Instead, the hormones, which are the secretions of the endocrine glands, are secreted directly into the blood. There are 9 endocrine glands: the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, all found in the central nervous system. Then we have the thyroid gland and parathyroid glands, the thymus, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, and the gonads, ovaries in females and testes in males. Exocrine glands have ducts and secrete their products onto the surface of an organ. Examples of exocrine secretions include mucus, sweat, oil, saliva, milk, earwax, digestive enzymes. And the exocrine glands can either be unicellular, which is rare but seen in the goblet cell, which produces mucus, or they can be multicellular, which is more common. And there are many different types of ducts. We can have simple straight ducts, or branched ducts, or coiled, or acinar, meaning that they bow outward. They can be simple or branched. If they are compound, then they might have many different tubes or many different bulbs. The pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine functions. Endocrine secretions are insulin and glucagon. These are hormones that help to regulate blood sugar. Exocrine secretions are the digestive enzymes that are very useful in the digestion of our nutrients from the food we eat and the beverages we drink. Epithelial tissues are at high risk of developing cancer because of the high rate of regeneration coupled with the exposure to environmental assaults. This image shows cervical cancer on the left and normal epithelia of the cervical on the right. The human papillomavirus, which is a sexually transmitted disease, causes cervical cancer. Now let's look at connective tissue. Connective tissues, abbreviated CT, support and bind organs. There are many types of connective tissues that vary in structure and function, but they are all related by the following 3 characteristics: ground substance, fibers, and cells. The ground substance is the extracellular matrix. It is not considered interstitial tissue fluid. The ground substance varies from fluid to solid. Fibers are the proteins located within the ground substance, and they include collagen, reticular fibers, and elastin fibers. Cells are going to be organized in the extracellular matrix, and these are the living components of connective tissues. All types of connective tissues arise from the same embryonic germ layer called the mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is a specialized mesoderm. Fibroblasts secrete fibers in most connective tissues, so they will be secreting the collagen, reticular, and elastin fibers. However, chondroblasts and osteoblasts secrete fibers in cartilage and bone, respectively. Collagen fibers are the most abundant fiber in the body. They are thick, white fibers that add strength and resiliency to connective tissues within all organs. Reticular fibers are thinner than collagen fibers, and they form a netted meshwork of proteins that support the liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. Elastic fibers are composed of elastin, which are yellow fibers that stretch and recoil easily. We see a lot of elastic fibers in our skin as well as our blood vessels. This is an example of the fibroblast that is secreting the collagen fibers shown here in white, the elastin fibers shown here in yellow, and the reticular fibers shown in blue. The ground substance is the light blue extracellular matrix that contains the fibers as well as these cells, such as the fibroblasts, and white blood cells such as macrophages, lymphocytes, mast cells, and neutrophils. We may also see fat cells as well as capillaries of blood vessels strewn throughout this tissue type. Functions of connective tissues include connects and supports other tissues via an extensive network of collagen. The collagen network in our body is so extensive that it has its own name, and it's called the fascia. Connective tissues will also protect the soft organs. Bone and cartilage form a structural framework for the body. Immune defense. All those white blood cells that I showed you earlier attack pathogens, helping to keep us healthy as part of the first line of defense. Insulation and cushioning. Adipose tissues will collect under the skin and around organs. Energy. Adipose tissues will secrete their fatty acids to provide energy to these organs. And transportation. Blood and lymph circulate nutrients, oxygen, and tissue fluid throughout vessels. This illustration shows the adipose tissue that is collecting under the abdomen, called abdominal fat, or around the organs, and this is called visceral fat. We also find adipose tissue within the yellow bone marrow of our skeleton. There are three major types of connective tissue categorized by the ground substance and the fibers present. Connective tissue proper, fluid connective tissues, and supporting connective tissues. Subcategories of these three major types of connective tissues include, for connective tissue proper, we have loose and dense. The loose connective tissue proper will be jelly-like in its ground substance. The dense connective tissue proper will not have much ground substance at all. It will mainly be collagen fibers. Fluid connective tissues include blood and lymph. And then supporting connective tissues include the cartilage, which is going to have a rubbery ground substance, and bone, which is going to have a mineralized ground substance of calcium and phosphate. Let's talk about each of these categories, the first being connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper contains a variety of cell types and protein fibers. There are two major types of connective tissue proper, loose connective tissue proper and dense connective tissue proper. In loose connective tissue proper, fibers are loosely organized in a jelly-like ground substance. This type of tissue absorbs shock, binds tissues, and diffuses nutrients. Three types of loose connective tissue proper are areolar, adipose, and reticular. Areolar is found underneath all epithelial tissues. Adipose is found deep to the skin and around organs. Reticular connective tissue proper is found in the liver, spleen, and lymph nodes. Here are the tables that describe these tissues further. In connective tissue proper, loose connective tissue, areolar tissue, we just like to call this areolar connective tissue. This is the one that is going to be found underneath all the epithelial tissues. Shown here in this illustration, we can see transitional epithelium with an underlying layer of areolar connective tissue. When you get into your second anatomy class, you will learn that areolar connective tissue found in mucous membranes is called the lamina propria. So just put that in the back of your mind. So the loose connective tissue, areolar connective tissue, is going to be jelly-like, and it's going to have all three fiber types, as well as fibroblasts, macrophages, mast cells, and white blood cells. So this illustration we saw earlier was an illustration of areolar connective tissue. The function of this tissue is to wrap and cushion organs. It also is part of our immune defense because of the macrophages and other white blood cells. It plays a role in inflammation, and it holds and conveys tissue fluids, keeping our tissues lubricated. It is widely distributed under all the epithelia in the body. And here's your reminder that it forms the lamina propria of mucous membranes. It will packages organs and surround capillaries. So it's kind of a supporting and nourishing tissue, very widely distributed. The next type of connective tissue proper loose connective tissue is adipose tissue. We just call this one adipose for short. Its matrix is going to be similar to areolar as it is gel-like, but it is very sparse. There's not as much extracellular ground substance. Instead, we're going to see closely packed adipocytes or fat cells. The nuclei will be pushed to the side by large fat droplets found in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. The function of this tissue type is to provide reserve fuel and insulate against heat loss, support, and protect the organs. We'll find it under the skin as our abdominal or subcutaneous fat. If it is going to be around the organs, it is visceral fat. It will also be found around kidneys and eyeballs, helping to anchor the eyeballs in the skull, and also found in the breasts surrounding the mammary glands. The third type of connective tissue proper loose connective tissue is reticular, and this can be just called reticular tissue. It is going to be composed of a loose network of reticular fibers, shown here in black, and the ground matrix will be gel-like, and we will see white blood cells that are going to be resting on the reticular fibers. The function is to form a soft internal skeleton that supports other cell types, such as those white blood cells. And we'll find it in the lymphoid organs, such as the lymph nodes, bone marrow, and spleen. We'll also find it in the liver. That's why all of these organs have this spongy type of texture. In dense connective tissue proper, the fibers are arranged in bundles that provide tensile strength, elasticity, and protection. There are three types of dense connective tissue propers: dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Dense regular connective tissue is found in the tendons of skeletal muscles and the ligaments of the bone. Dense irregular connective tissue is found in the dermis of the skin, making up the bulk of the skin. It is also found in the articular capsules of skeletal joints and the outer substance of hollow organs. Elastic connective tissue is found in the aorta and withstands blood pressure directly from the heart. Recall, if the aorta is compromised, the victim will bleed out within a minute. And so the elastic connective tissue has to be very durable. Let's look at the tables of the connective tissue proper dense connective tissues. The first one is dense regular. This one has primarily parallel collagen fibers, a few elastic fibers. The major cell type is the fibroblast, shown here with the nuclei in purple. These are the cells that are secreting the fibers. The function is to attach muscles to bones, and they are called tendons when they do that, or they will attach bone to bones as ligaments. And they will withstand great tensile or pulling stress when pulling force is applied in one direction. Tendons and ligaments are fragile. They can only stretch about 6% of their length before they start to tear. A tear is a sprain, and also called a soft injury, a soft tissue injury, and can take a long time to heal or may not heal at all. In the connective tissue proper dense connective tissue, dense irregular, known as dense irregular connective tissue, these are going to be primarily irregularly arranged collagen fibers, so they're going to be at angles rather than parallel. We will see a few elastic fibers, and the major cell type is the fibroblast, shown with the nuclei in purple. The function of dense irregular connective tissue is to withstand tension exerted in many directions, providing structural strength. We'll find it in the fibrous capsules of our organs, which are going to be surrounding the organs. They'll also be found in the articular capsules of our joints. They will also be found in the dermis of the skin, making up the majority of your skin, and the submucosa of the digestive tract. In the third type of connective tissue proper, dense connective tissue, this is elastic connective tissue. This is going to have a high degree of elastic fibers, and they will be able to stretch and return to their original length after stretching. That's what elastic means. It can return to its original length. It won't, stretch out and become lax. And this is going to help maintain the pulsative flow of blood through the arteries. Notice here we see it in the aorta. It will also allow the passive recoil of the lungs following inspiration. So after you have inspired air, you will then expire or exhale, and the lungs will return to their original shape because of the elastic connective tissue located within the lungs. There's also supporting connective tissue, which will consist of cells within a semi-solid to solid extracellular matrix. There are two types of supporting connective tissue, cartilage and bone. Cartilage will have a flexible and rubbery ground substance as part of its extracellular matrix. There are three types of cartilages: hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Please be sure to call elastic cartilage exactly that, elastic cartilage. This is different than the elastic connective tissue seen prior. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant cartilage and is found in the tip of the nose, the trachea, the ends of the long bones, and the ribs. Fibrocartilage is resistant to compression and as such is found in the meniscus of the knee and the intervertebral discs of the spine. Elastic cartilage is rare. It can be found in the ears and the epiglottis because it needs to be able to move and then recoil back to its original position. In hyaline cartilage, we see an amorphous, meaning shapeless, but firm matrix. The collagen fibers will form an imperceptible network. It looks like frosted glass. The major fiber type here is the chondroblasts. These will produce the matrix. When they are mature, they will lie in these little cavities called lacuna. So these chondroblasts are going to be immature and secrete the collagen fibers, but when they are mature, they are then called chondrocytes. Blast means an embryonic cell, cyte means a mature cell. Chondro means cartilage. The function of hyaline cartilage is to support and reinforce the skeleton. We see that is going to be forming most of the embryonic skeleton, and even in the adults it will cover the ends of the long bones and joint cavities, form our costal cartilages of the ribs, as well as the cartilage of the nose, trachea, and larynx. Fibrocartilage is the second type of cartilage, and it's going to have a matrix similar to hyaline cartilage, but less firm. And we can actually see the parallel layers of thick collagen fibers that predominate. Here are the chondrocytes that are in the lacuna. Remember, when they are actively secreting the collagen, they are called chondroblasts. Chondro for cartilage, blast for embryonic. When they are adults and no longer secreting the collagen but yet maintaining the matrix in the lacuna, they are called chondrocytes, cartilage cells. The function of the fibrocartilage is to provide tensile strength with the ability to absorb compressive shock. Therefore, it's going to be found in the intervertebral discs of the spine as well as the meniscus of the knee joint. The pubic symphysis is where your pubic bones join together, and this bears weight from the entire trunk of the body. Elastic cartilage is the third type of cartilage, and it's very rare. It is similar to hyaline cartilage, but it has elastic fibers in the matrix, seen here in black. The chondrocytes are shown in their lacuna, and the function of elastic cartilage is to maintain the shape of a structure while allowing great flexibility, such as seen in the ears, as well as the epiglottis. When you swallow, your epiglottis will close so that you don't accidentally aspirate fluids or solids from your food or beverage. Bone is the hardest and most rigid tissue in the body. It is a structural connective tissue. There are two major types of bone. There's compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone consists of columns and is dense. Spongy bone consists of a honeycomb matrix and is porous. Bone is going to be formed from calcium phosphate minerals that will form a crystal. Bone is also called osseous tissue, so keep that in mind. And it is made up of hard calcified matrix containing many collagen fibers as well as calcium and phosphate crystals. There are no chondrocytes or chondroblasts in osseous tissue. Instead, these are going to be called osteocytes and osteoblasts. The osteoblasts are going to be the embryonic cells that will secrete the collagen matrix as well as laying down the hydroxyapatite crystals, which are made of calcium and phosphorus. When the osteoblasts have secreted the matrix, they are then going to be trapped in a lacuna, much like the chondrocytes. But these are not chondrocytes, they are now called osteocytes. So the embryonic version of the osteocyte is called the osteoblast, and it is secreting the collagen and laying down the calcium phosphate matrix. When it matures, it becomes the osteocyte. Much like the chondroblast becomes the chondrocyte, the osteoblast becomes the osteocyte. The function of osseous tissue is that bone supports and protects the body by enclosing structures such as the brain, the lungs, and the heart. The bone also provides levers for the muscles to act on, allowing the skeleton to move. It stores calcium and phosphate as well as other minerals, and as we saw earlier, the yellow bone marrow will store fat. Red bone marrow will be the site for blood cell formation called hematopoiesis. We find these in the bones of the skeleton. Now let's take a look at fluid connective tissue. This type of connective tissue consists of cells flowing in a fluid extracellular matrix and includes two types, the blood and the lymph. Blood cells are going to flow through arteries and veins in a watery fluid called the plasma. The plasma is the ground substance. It's the extracellular matrix. There are not going to be many fibers in the blood tissue. The only time we really see fibers in the blood tissue is if we need to clot. So the function of blood is to transport nutrients and oxygen to the tissues as well as removing wastes. The other type of fluid connective tissue is lymph. This contains immune cells and tissue fluids which are going to then flow through the lymphatic vessels and nodes. The function of lymph is to drain tissue fluid as well as containing immune cells to help fight against pathogens that could harm us and cause disease. So the lymph is not only part of the draining of the tissue fluid, but it is a major part of our immune system. Let's take a look at the blood here, this fluid connective tissue. The red blood cells are called erythrocytes, and they are strewn through a watery matrix called the plasma. Here is maybe a little platelet right here, which will be, little fiber that is found in the plasma and will only start to actually create fibers during blood clotting. There are two white blood cells pictured here, a lymphocyte and a neutrophil. So the description of blood is red and white blood cells in a fluid matrix called the plasma. The function of blood is to transport respiratory gases, nutrients, waste, and other substances throughout the body, and it's contained within blood vessels. Whenever you put down the location of blood, don't just say within the body. It has to be within blood vessels. If blood is just found within your body, then you are hemorrhaging. This is lymph. Here we see it's a milky white substance that is going to be composed of white blood cells as well as tissue fluid. Notice that lymphatic vessels and capillaries are going to flow side by side within the body, partly because of the role of the lymphatic vessels in draining tissue fluid and taking it up to the thoracic duct, as mentioned earlier, and recirculating it throughout the body, keeping it fresh and making sure that the tissue fluid doesn't pool in a process called edema. Another thing that the lymph does is it helps to provide white blood cells to the immune system function, and the white blood cells can go back and forth from the blood capillaries to the lymphatic vessels. All right, now let's look at muscle tissue. We've got two more tissue types to go. These are way less intense than the epithelial or connective tissues, as far as this chapter is concerned. All right, muscle tissues are going to move the skeleton, the heart, and the hollow organs. Muscle tissues have the following characteristics. The cells are densely filled with the contractile proteins called actin and myosin. If you remember, actin is going to be part of your cytoskeleton. I believe it was like the intermediate filaments. Muscle tissue is also highly metabolic, and it relies on the abundance of ATP, oxygen, and glucose. So the more muscle tissue you have, the higher metabolism is going to be. Muscle tissue will also generate heat as a byproduct of this metabolism. And as such, muscle tissues have to have high vascularity, meaning they contain an abundance of blood vessels. There are 3 types of muscle tissues: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle is striated and voluntary. It consists of long, cylindrical, multinucleated cells. It will be found in the muscles that move the skeleton and is the primary component of the musculoskeletal system. The cardiac muscle is striated and involuntary. It consists of branched cells with 1 or 2 nuclei and is found in the muscles of the heart. Smooth muscle will lack striations and is involuntary. It consists of fusiform or spindle-shaped cells that contain 1 nucleus and is found in the walls of the hollow organs. Here are the tables that describe the 3 types of muscles. The first is the skeletal muscle. These are long, multinucleated, striated cells. The striations are the stripes that you see here looking like a candy cane. The nuclei are going to be nuclei of myoblasts. This is no longer connective tissue. A lot of people get this confused with a connective tissue. Muscle is not connective tissue. It is different. You will not see fibroblasts in here. You will not see chondroblasts or osteoblasts or anything like that. You are going to see myoblasts, which are going to have their nuclei remaining here. And you're going to see actin and myosin as your proteins rather than so much collagen. Collagen is going to be surrounding the entire muscle cell, but not actually within it, okay? So this is a different type of tissue than a connective tissue. Please don't get that confused. So say it with me. Muscle tissue is not connective tissue. Thank you. The function of the skeletal muscle is for voluntary movement. It's the only one of the 3 types of muscles that is voluntary. It is going to help us with our locomotion because shown here, it's going to act on our bones, which are the levers here, and it's going to thus move our body throughout space and time. The cardiac muscle. These are going to be striated. Notice that it looks like a candy cane again, so that's what these striations are. And it's going to be branched. We'll have 1 or 2 nuclei, but no more than that. And we'll have these intercalated discs. These are gap junctions that are going to join the adjacent cardiac muscle cells together and allow for the flow of ions during muscle contraction. This allows for the heart to beat as a unit. It's very important in order to maintain an appropriate heart rate. This is involuntary. You do not have to think about it in order for your heart to pump. Now, your emotions and thoughts will influence the rate of your heart, but we'll talk about that later as part of the sympathetic nervous system. Smooth muscle is the 3rd type of muscle cell, and this is non-striated. Notice that there are no candy cane-like striations here. That's why it has the name smooth muscle. It's also going to have these fusiform shape or spindle shape, meaning that it's pinched on both ends. And we'll see 1 nucleus in each of these cells. This is going to be an involuntary muscle as well. It is not going to be under our conscious influence. Now, your emotions could play a role in the digestion and absorption of your nutrients. If you're under a lot of stress, you're not going to digest and absorb nutrients as well. But again, we'll talk about that with the nervous system and the sympathetic fight or flight response. But otherwise, it is involuntary. You're not under the control of it. Your brain is taking care of it without you thinking about it. Speaking of the brain, let's talk about our last type of tissue, which is the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is found in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. There are 2 major types of cells in the nervous tissue, the neurons and the glial cells. Neurons are the cells that conduct nerve impulses, and glial cells will support the neurons by helping them grow, nourish them, and aid in their communication. There are actually more glial cells in the nervous tissue than neurons. Neurons are highly metabolic and will begin to die without oxygen in as little as 5 minutes. That's why if someone is unconscious, it is imperative that they get oxygen flow as soon as possible to prevent brain damage. This is the table showing nervous tissue, and these cells that are stained in brown are the neurons, and the yellow cells are the neuroglial cells. As you can see, there are many more neuroglial cells than neurons. However, the neurons are the ones that we focus on the most because they are the ones that actively conduct the impulses. They can't do it without the help of their supporting cells, though. The function of the nervous tissue is to transmit electrical signals from sensory receptors to the effectors. So the sensory receptors are going to be what? Bring in sensory information from your environment, and they take it to the brain and spinal cord for processing. And then the brain and spinal cord will send information to the effectors, which are going to be called muscles and glands. And of course, we've already talked about all of those. You know that you have skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and you have endocrine and exocrine glands. So that's exactly what nervous tissue is doing. It is going to be receiving sensory input from the environment and then conveying the response to your muscles and glands. So we're going to find the nervous tissue in our brain, spinal cord, and nerves. But with that said, we have nerve endings that are going to be found in all the tissues of our body. You thought we were going to be done, but last but not least, we have tissue membranes. Now we're going to start putting it all together. These are not necessarily organs, but they're getting close. Tissue membranes are thin layers of epithelial and connective tissues that are joined to cover major body regions. There are 4 types of tissue membranes, and they include the cutaneous membrane, mucous membranes, serous membranes, and synovial membranes. The cutaneous membrane is found in our skin. The mucous membranes is found in the respiratory, GI, and urinary tracts. The serous membrane is found in the ventral body cavities, and the synovial membranes are in the joints of the skeleton. The cutaneous membrane is a dry membrane that covers and protects the body. It is found in the integument, which is also called the skin. It contains the following tissue types: keratinized stratified squamous epithelium on top of areolar and dense irregular connective tissue. So this is actually a simple organ and is the majority of the integumentary system. There will be some other tissue types that are involved with that, such as the subcutaneous tissue known as the adipose connective tissue. The cutaneous membrane has keratinized stratified squamous epithelium on top of areolar and dense irregular connective tissue. This illustration shows the cutaneous membrane. As you can see, it is the skin. So this will be the major focus of our next chapter. Mucous membranes are moist and line internal passageways that are open to the exterior of the body. That's why they have to maintain that moist nature. They need to have mucus and saliva and other types of lubricating liquids. They're found in the GI tract, so that's the gastrointestinal tract from the mouth to the anus, the respiratory tract from the nose, the mouth to the lungs, and the urinary tract from the bladder to the kidneys. Mucous membranes contain the following tissue types: non-keratinized stratified squamous or pseudostratified columnar epithelium on top of areolar connective tissue. And remember, the areolar connective tissue of a mucous membrane is called the lamina propria. Here we can see that the mucous membranes are open to the external body, which is why they have to maintain that mucus or saliva in order to keep them moist. The respiratory system is actually an outpocket of the digestive system. That's why they are connected, and this poses a problem. The epiglottis is going to be found right here, which is a type of elastic cartilage, and the epiglottis will need to open and close based on whether you are breathing or swallowing. If you are swallowing, you are taking in fluid or food down the esophagus to the stomach. During swallowing, the epiglottis must be closed, or else you will aspirate that food and beverage into your respiratory tract, which can then lead to choking. During breathing, the respiratory tract must be open so that air can flow from the trachea into the bronchi of the lungs. Serous membranes are double-layered membranes that line the ventral body cavities. We talked about these in the first lecture. They are found in the pericardium of the heart, the pleura of the lungs, and the peritoneum of the abdominal cavity. They contain the following tissue types: simple squamous epithelium called mesothelium, at the top of areolar connective tissue. Notice that we've seen areolar connective tissue in each of these Tissue membranes. Remember that areolar connective tissue is found underneath all epithelial tissue, so that makes sense that it's going to be found in all the membranes. The serous membranes are closed to the outside. Notice that the pleura is closed to the outside. It's not connected to the actual bronchi and the trachea. That is the role of the mucous membranes. This is the pericardium around the heart, and then the peritoneum around the abdominal viscera. The last tissue membrane is called a synovial membrane, and this secretes a thick fluid that lubricates the joints. These can be found in the freely movable joints of the skeleton, and they contain the following tissue types: simple squamous epithelium on top of, you guessed it, areolar connective tissue. As far as tissues and aging go, as tissues age, they lose the ability to maintain homeostasis. Cells lose the ability to synthesize collagen and keratin, and the tissues will ultimately break down. Many tissues lose mass through a process called atrophy. However, diet, exercise, good genetics, and healthy habits can maintain tissue health as the body ages. This is a Venn diagram here that shows healthy aging related to a good diet, good genes. We're not all going to have good genes, but your behaviors and lifestyle can actually activate genes that are going to either be healthy or not healthy. Productive pursuits. Having goals is always a good plan because that keeps you aging healthily. Exercise and social activity also do as well. You don't have to have a very large social group, and you don't have to do a lot of intense exercise, but getting out there and walking your dog and saying hi to people who are also walking their dogs, that counts as both exercise and social activity, which is Miss Kilgore's favorites. Our joke: when a tree gets a year older, it makes a growth ring by adding another layer of tissue around its girth. Boy, does that sound familiar. Thanks, Spice of Life. Have a great day. Be blessed. Thank you so much.